I want you to think about someone you know. Maybe a family member, maybe a friend, maybe yourself, someone who works hard. Someone who is not lazy, someone who genuinely wants better. And yet, year after year, nothing changes. The bank account stays empty. The debt stays heavy, the dreams stay exactly where they were, just out of reach. And the question that haunts them, the question they are almost afraid to ask out loud is this. Why? Why does it never change? Why does trying never seem to be enough? Today I am going to answer that question, not with platitudes, not with hustle culture nonsense, with the actual psychological, neurological, and systemic truth about why poor people stay poor and why it has almost nothing to do with effort, intelligence, or character. This is going to be uncomfortable. It is going to challenge things you have been told your entire life. But if you stay with me, if you are willing to look at this honestly, something might shift. Something that could change the entire direction of your financial life. Let us start with the most misunderstood thing about poverty. Most people, including many people who are living in it, believe that poverty is primarily a financial condition. That it is about not having enough money. And while that is technically true, it is also dangerously incomplete. Because poverty is not just a financial condition. Poverty is a psychological condition, a neurological condition, a social condition. And in many ways, a biological condition. It rewires the brain. It restructures how a person thinks, feels, and makes decisions. And it does this so deeply, so thoroughly, and so invisibly that many people carry its effects long after the financial circumstances that created them have changed. This is why you can give someone money and watch them return to poverty within a few years. Not because they are foolish, not because they do not deserve better, but because the money changed their circumstances without changing the internal architecture that those circumstances had built. Let me explain what I mean. Dr. Sendhil Mullainathan at Harvard and Dr. Eldar Shaffer at Princeton spent years studying the psychology of scarcity. Their research produced a finding that should have changed everything about how we talk about poverty in America. They found that the experience of not having enough of any resource, but especially money, fundamentally changes how the brain functions. Scarcity captures the mind. It pulls cognitive resources toward the immediate problem and away from everything else. When you are worried about paying rent, when you do not know how you are going to feed your children next week, your brain is not thinking about long-term financial planning. Your brain is not thinking about investing. Your brain is not thinking about self-improvement or career advancement. Your brain is thinking about survival, right now, this moment. And in that state of mental siege, every other kind of thinking becomes harder. Mullainathan and Shaffer measured this directly. They found that the cognitive burden of financial scarcity is equivalent to losing 13 IQ points. 13 points, that is the cognitive difference between a good night of sleep and complete sleep deprivation. Think about what this means. The people who are most blamed for making bad decisions are making those decisions with significantly less cognitive capacity available to them, because the stress of their financial situation is consuming it. This is not an excuse, this is a fact, and it completely reframes the question of why poor people stay poor. Because the answer in part is this: poverty itself makes it harder to escape poverty. The condition creates the conditions for its own continuation. And no amount of motivational content changes that neurological reality. Now let me go deeper, because the cognitive effects of scarcity are only one layer of this. Underneath them is something even more fundamental. Something that begins not in adulthood, not when bills arrive and bank accounts run dry, but in childhood. Long before a person ever has a financial decision to make. Researchers at Harvard, Stanford, and the University of Wisconsin have spent decades studying what early childhood financial stress does to the developing brain. And what they have found is sobering. Children who grow up in chronic financial instability show measurable differences in the development of two critical brain regions. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for planning, impulse control, and long-term decision-making. And the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. In children who experience chronic poverty, the amygdala becomes hyperactive. It is constantly scanning for danger, constantly on alert, constantly interpreting neutral situations as threats. And the prefrontal cortex, which should develop as a counterbalance, develops more slowly and less robustly. The result is an adult whose brain is wired for survival, not for strategy. Wired to react, not to plan. Wired to seek immediate relief, not long-term gain. And here is the part that breaks my heart every time I think about it. These children did not choose this. They were born into an environment. And that environment shaped their neurology before they were old enough to know it was happening, before they had any say in the matter, before they had any tools to protect themselves from it. And then, as adults, they are told that their financial situation is a reflection of their choices. Their discipline, their ambition. As if the neural architecture built by 10 years of childhood survival stress is simply a preference. As if rewiring a brain is as simple as deciding to try harder. This is one of the great moral failures of the American conversation about poverty. It places the entire burden of a systemic, neurological, generational problem on the shoulders of the individual and then judges them for struggling under the weight. But let me be clear about something. Understanding this is not about removing responsibility. It is about locating responsibility accurately, because you cannot fix something you have misdiagnosed. And for generations, America has been misdiagnosing poverty as a character flaw, when the evidence clearly shows it is something far more complex. Now I want to talk about something that does not get discussed enough. The psychology of financial identity. Because one of the most powerful forces keeping people financially stuck is not the absence of opportunity. It is the absence of a belief that the opportunity is meant for them. Psychologists call this self-concept. It is the deep, often unconscious story a person holds about who they are. And for someone who grew up poor, who watched their parents struggle, who internalized the message, through 1,000 small moments, that people like us do not get ahead, the self-concept becomes a ceiling. An invisible upper limit on what feels possible, possible not in theory. Possible for me, because the brain does not operate on abstract possibility. It operates on personal identity. And when the personal identity says I am someone who struggles financially, the brain will work with extraordinary creativity and consistency to make that identity true. It will filter out opportunities that do not match. It will create problems that bring things back to familiar territory. It will generate fear, resistance, and self-sabotage at precisely the moments when something better is within reach. Not out of malice, out of a deep, primal need to remain consistent with who it believes you are. This is why financial education alone does not change financial outcomes. You can teach a person everything there is to know about money, and if their deep identity says, I am not someone who builds wealth, that knowledge will not translate into lasting behavior change. Because behavior follows identity, always the information goes in. But the identity filters it through its own lens, and the lens says, that is not for someone like me. Let me give you a real example of how this plays out. A man named Marcus grew up in a low-income neighborhood in Detroit. His father worked 2 jobs and still could not make ends meet. His mother clipped coupons and prayed every month that the utilities would not be shut off. Marcus watched all of this, he absorbed all of this. And without anyone saying it explicitly, he learned something about what money meant in his world. Money was always leaving, money was never enough. Money caused stress and shame and the particular silence that falls over a house when the adults are worried about survival. Marcus grew up, he got a job, he started earning, and here is what happened. Every time his bank account started to grow, every time things started to feel more stable, something would happen. A car repair he had not planned for, an impulsive purchase he could not explain afterward. A business idea that fell apart at the last moment. His friends called it bad luck. Marcus called it his life, but what it actually was his nervous system doing exactly what it had been trained to do. Keeping him in familiar territory, keeping him at the financial level that felt, in some deep and wordless way, like home. This is the psychological trap that the title of this video is about. Not a trap set by malicious forces, though those exist too. But a trap built brick by experience, by memory. By the nervous system's relentless commitment to the familiar. And the only way out of it is not to work harder, the only way out of it is to understand it. I want to talk about something now that most financial content completely ignores. The role of chronic stress in long-term financial outcomes. Because stress is not just an uncomfortable feeling. Stress is a physiological state that has profound effects on decision-making, behavior, and long-term health, and when it is chronic, when it never really goes away, it changes everything. The primary stress hormone in the human body is cortisol. In short bursts, cortisol is useful. It sharpens focus, increases energy, and prepares the body to deal with an immediate threat. But when cortisol is elevated chronically, when the financial stress never fully resolves, when the threat never really passes, the effects are devastating. Chronic cortisol elevation impairs memory. It reduces the capacity for creative thinking. It narrows attention to immediate threats and makes it nearly impossible to think expansively about the future. It damages the hippocampus, the brain region central to learning and memory. It increases impulsivity, and it generates a constant low-level state of anxiety that makes every decision feel more dangerous than it actually is. Now consider what this means for someone living in chronic financial stress. Every financial decision they make, every choice about how to spend a limited dollar, is being made inside a brain that is running on cortisol. A brain that is impaired in precisely the ways that financial decision-making requires. Long-term thinking, creative problem-solving, impulse control, risk assessment. All of it degraded, all of it made harder by the very condition they are trying to escape. This is not a small thing, this is not a peripheral detail. This is the central mechanism by which financial stress perpetuates itself. And the cruelest part, the people making the most consequential financial decisions, decisions where the margin for error is smallest, are making them under the greatest cognitive and physiological impairment. While wealthier people, whose financial decisions are less immediately consequential, make them from a place of relative calm and cognitive clarity. This is one of the most profound structural inequalities in American financial life. And almost no one talks about it. Now I want to address something directly. Because I know what some people are thinking right now, they are thinking, okay, but plenty of people grew up poor and became wealthy. What about them? This is a real and important question, and the answer is not that those people are exceptions that disprove the rule. The answer is that they are people who, for various reasons, managed to interrupt the patterns we have been describing. Sometimes through a mentor who saw them differently than they saw themselves. Sometimes through a single transformative experience that cracked the identity open. Sometimes through sheer exposure to a different world, a different way of living. Thinking and relating to money that gave their brain new reference points. Sometimes through years of deliberate, painful internal work. But here is what almost every one of those stories has in common. The change did not come from information, it did not come from working harder. It came from a fundamental shift in identity. A moment or a series of moments in which the person stopped seeing themselves as someone who struggles financially and started seeing themselves as someone who is building something different. That shift is the hinge point, everything else follows from it. But for most people, people who never encounter the mentor, the experience, the exposure, the identity never shifts. And so the patterns continue, generation after generation. Let me talk about something else that keeps people financially stuck. Something that lives not inside the individual, but in the social fabric around them. Sociologists call it the crab bucket effect. You may have heard of it. When crabs are placed in a bucket, an interesting thing happens. If one crab starts to climb toward the top, the others pull it back down. Not out of malice, simply because of the mechanics of their situation. But the metaphor for human social dynamics is painfully accurate. When someone from a low-income community starts to rise, when they start to dress differently, speak differently, pursue different opportunities, the social pressure they face can be enormous. Accusations of thinking you are better than everyone else. Teasing about the way they talk or the way they dress. Subtle and not so subtle messages that loyalty to their community means staying the same. And for many people, people for whom community is survival, for whom belonging is not optional, this social pressure is enough to pull them back. Not because they do not want better, but because wanting better can feel like a betrayal of where they came from. Like abandoning the people who love them, like saying that everything their parents did and sacrificed was not good enough. These are not small emotional obstacles, these are profound identity conflicts. And they are rarely discussed in the context of financial mobility. Because we prefer the simple story, work hard, make smart choices, rise. But the actual story is far more complex. It involves neurology and childhood and identity and social pressure and systemic barriers and generational wounds that cannot be budgeted away. And the people who are still stuck are not failing to follow a simple formula. They are navigating a landscape that the simple formula was never designed to account for. Now let me talk about the systemic layer, because everything we have discussed so far has been about internal psychology. And the internal work is real and it matters. But it would be dishonest to talk about why poor people stay poor without addressing the external structures that make poverty so hard to escape. The American financial system was not designed with poor people in mind. In many ways, it was designed in active opposition to their interests. Consider the basic mechanics of banking in low-income communities. Traditional banks have historically underserved these communities, which means many low-income Americans have had to rely on alternative financial services, check cashing stores, payday lenders, rent-to-own businesses that charge fees and interest rates that would be criminal if applied by traditional banks. A payday loan, the financial product most readily available to someone with no credit and no bank account, can carry an annual percentage rate of 300 to 400%. This means that someone borrowing $300 to cover a gap until their next paycheck can end up paying back $600 or more. A person who is already financially stretched, already cognitively impaired by stress, already operating without the financial knowledge or support systems that wealthier people take for granted, being charged 400% interest on a $300 loan, and then being told that their financial situation is a reflection of their choices. This is not a neutral system. This is a system that extracts wealth from the people who have the least of it. That profits from desperation. That is designed at a structural level to make poverty more expensive and therefore harder to escape. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented, studied, and well understood by economists and sociologists. The problem is that understanding it has not yet translated into the political will to change it. And in the meantime, millions of Americans are paying a poverty tax, a surcharge on being poor, that makes every dollar they earn worth less than it would be worth in the hands of someone wealthier. I am telling you all of this not to make you feel hopeless. I am telling you because the first step to changing any system, internal or external, is seeing it clearly. Without the distortion of shame, without the fog of self-blame. With honest, clear, accurate understanding of what is actually happening and why. Because you cannot fight what you cannot see. And for too long, too many people have been fighting themselves, when the real battle required a much wider field of vision. So where does this leave us? If the barriers are neurological and psychological and social and systemic, if the deck is stacked in so many directions at once, what is actually possible? I want to be honest with you here, because false hope is its own kind of cruelty. And the internet is full of people telling you that the right mindset will overcome any obstacle, as if mindset is a substitute for structural change, as if thinking differently will pay off student loans or close the racial wealth gap or eliminate predatory lending. It will not. Mindset matters enormously, but mindset is not magic. And pretending otherwise is an insult to the complexity of what people are actually dealing with. What is true is this: there are things within your control, and there are things that are not, and the real work, is to be absolutely clear about which is which. Because spending energy fighting what you cannot control depletes the energy you need for what you can. And spending energy blaming yourself for what was never within your control is one of the most expensive things a person can do. So let me talk about what is within your control. The first thing within your control is your narrative. Not your circumstances, your narrative about your circumstances. The story you tell yourself about what your past means and what your future is allowed to hold. This matters more than almost anything else, because the narrative shapes the identity. And the identity shapes the behavior, and the behavior shapes the outcome. Every person who has ever broken a generational financial pattern has, at some point, changed the story they were telling themselves. Not by pretending the past did not happen, not by denying the reality of the obstacles, but by refusing to let the past write the final word about the future. By finding a narrative that is honest about the difficulty and simultaneously open to the possibility of something different. This is harder than it sounds, because the old narrative is not just a story. It is encoded in the nervous system. It is reinforced by memory and emotion and the expectations of the people around you. Changing it requires more than a decision, it requires repetition. Exposure to new reference points, new evidence about what is possible for someone like you. And the willingness to sit with the discomfort of becoming someone different before that different person feels natural. The second thing within your control is your relationship with discomfort. This is perhaps the most underrated factor in financial mobility, because almost everything that leads to financial improvement involves discomfort. Having honest conversations about money, looking at a bank statement that tells a difficult story, saying no to purchases that provide immediate relief, asking for help or mentorship or opportunity, starting a business or investment with no guarantee of success. All of it involves tolerating discomfort. And people who grew up in chronic financial stress have often developed a very low tolerance for discomfort, because discomfort in their environment was a signal of danger. The nervous system learned to respond to discomfort with urgency, with the need for immediate relief. And in adulthood, that urgent need for relief from discomfort becomes one of the most consistent obstacles to financial growth. Building a higher tolerance for discomfort, learning to sit with anxiety, uncertainty, and the unknown without immediately acting to relieve it, is one of the most financially valuable things a person can develop. Not because suffering is noble, but because the path to something better almost always runs through a territory that feels uncomfortable. And the ability to keep walking through that territory without running back to what is familiar is what separates people who change their financial trajectory from people who stay where they are. The third thing within your control is your environment, not immediately. Not completely, but over time with intention. The research on human behavior is overwhelmingly clear on one point. Environment shapes behavior more powerfully than willpower. If you're surrounded by people who have no financial ambition, who normalize debt and scarcity, and the belief that this is just how life is, changing your financial trajectory while staying fully immersed in that environment is extraordinarily difficult. Not impossible, but extraordinarily difficult. Gradually, intentionally exposing yourself to different environments, to people who think about money differently, to communities, even online communities, where financial growth is normalized, changes the reference points your brain uses to calibrate what is possible. It gives your nervous system new data, new evidence that different is achievable, new models for what a different financial identity looks like in practice. This is not about abandoning where you came from, it is about expanding the world you are exposed to. About giving yourself access to a wider range of possibilities, so that your brain has more to work with when it is deciding what is achievable for someone like you. Now I want to speak directly to you, not to an abstract audience, to you specifically. If you grew up without money, if you're still struggling now, if you have tried and failed and tried again, and wonder sometimes whether it will ever change, I want you to hear something clearly. Your struggle is not evidence of your unworthiness. It is not proof that you do not deserve better. It is not a reflection of your intelligence or your character or the depth of your humanity. It is the predictable outcome of a set of circumstances that were handed to you without your consent. Circumstances that shaped your neurology, that built your identity, that created patterns so deep and so invisible that most people never even know they are there. You are not failing. You are carrying something extraordinarily heavy, and you have been carrying it, in many cases, alone, without anyone ever taking the time to explain to you what it actually was. This video is that explanation, and I want you to sit with it. Not just process it intellectually, but actually sit with the possibility that the story you have been told about yourself, about why you are where you are, is incomplete. That you are not the problem, that the patterns are the problem. And that patterns, unlike character, can change, not easily, not quickly, but genuinely, verifiably, profoundly change. I want to leave you with three things. The first is permission. Permission to stop blaming yourself for circumstances that were built long before you had the capacity to understand them. This is not about avoiding responsibility. This is about placing responsibility where it actually belongs and freeing up the energy that has been spent on self-blame for something more useful. The second is a practice. Every morning before you do anything else, write one sentence. Not an affirmation, not a goal, a truthful statement about who you are becoming. Not who you wish you were, who you are in the process of becoming, something like, I am someone who is learning to see money clearly. I am someone who is breaking patterns that were never mine to begin with. I am someone who is building something that did not exist in my family before me. Write it, read it, let it sit. Do this every day for 30 days and notice what changes. Not in your bank account, not yet, in the way you talk to yourself about money. In the way you notice your own patterns, in the slowly shifting sense of what feels possible. The third is a reminder: change at this level is not linear. It does not follow a clean upward trajectory. It involves setbacks and confusion and moments of doubt so heavy you will wonder whether any of this is real. Those moments are not signs that you are failing. They are signs that you are doing something genuinely hard. Something that most people never attempt, something that most people choose not to see clearly enough to even begin. You are seeing it clearly, and that alone, the willingness to look, puts you further along than you might think. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is real, but it is not fixed. It is not permanent. It is not a verdict on your worth or your potential or your future. It is a distance, and distances can be crossed, one honest, imperfect, courageous step at a time. If this video reached something real in you today, if it named something you have felt but never had words for, I want you to do three things. First, comment the word "seen" below, because that is what this video was about. Seeing clearly, seeing the patterns, seeing yourself honestly and without the distortion of shame. If this video helped you see, let that word be your acknowledgement. Second, hit the like button, not for me, as an act of agreement with yourself. An agreement that you are taking this seriously. That you are done letting invisible patterns run your financial life without your awareness. Third, subscribe, because this is what we do here. We go beneath the surface. We take psychology and money and human behavior seriously. We talk about the things that actually matter, not the things that are easy to say. And there is so much more to explore. The next chapter of your financial story has not been written yet. Not by your past, not by your circumstances, not by the patterns you inherited. It is being written right now, in the choices you make after watching this. In the way you decide to see yourself going forward. That story belongs to you. It always has. Write it differently,